Hey there! Thank you for tuning into Duck Bricks. I'm Chris and welcome to Brick Breakdown, where I take a look at all of the LEGO sets in a given theme or for a given range. This time we're going to be taking a look at LEGO Monkie Kid. Every single set released so far since 2020, it's now 2021, which marks the approximate halfway point of the theme if LEGO is planning for it to last 3 years, like many other Big Bang themes. I figured that now that they've had 2 rather large waves and 1 smaller sized wave, it's a pretty good chance to take a look back and see all of the Monkie Kid sets, how they compare against each other, how they are in terms of price and value, and give my quick reviews on all the sets. I'll also be giving some brief rankings, so stay tuned for that at the end of the video, and thank you all for tuning into Duck Bricks. Alright, so before me you can see every single retail release Monkie Kid LEGO set from May 2020 all the way to March 2021. Do note that I am not counting polybags at this time because many of them are difficult to get outside of Asia, and actually some of them have only been released in China, at least so far. So I have only gathered the regular sets that any fan around the world can go into the local LEGO store or purchase from shop.lego.com. And boy, there is a lot here. You see, Monkie Kid kind of has this reputation of being a little bit overpriced and expensive. And while I can definitely see that for a few of the sets, it's hard to deny that a lot of the money that you're paying for these sets is going into making these gargantuan models, which I barely managed to cram all into one table, and Monkie Kid is far from over. In fact, it's only about halfway through its run if it lasts 3 years, and who knows if it may last even longer. So it's definitely a major theme, a really interesting one too, because it seemingly was originally developed just for the Chinese market, but then after the whole debacle over limited international releases and LEGO promising to end regional exclusives, Monkie Kid became available worldwide. But with a catch. You see, the Monkie Kid sets can only be bought from official LEGO stores or shop.lego.com. That means for people living in the US, for example, you can't go to a random Target or Walmart or even Amazon and take a look at these shelves and get these sets. You must buy them at lego.com, so essentially they're all direct-to-consumer sets. This is a little bit strange to me, and honestly I feel like that's going to hurt the marketing in the long run for the theme, especially because the way that a lot of kids get introduced to LEGO sets is by, well, finding them in stores, and they don't often always go to the LEGO store, but maybe if their family goes to a Target or a Walmart, something like that, they would see a set, but they can't do that for this theme because you can only get them at the LEGO store. The other kind of strange thing about the way that this theme is marketed, at least in the US, I say the way it's marketed, but the answer is really not at all, which is kind of a big shame. You see, the season 1 of the show has not even officially aired in the US at the time of this recording. Season 2 is already starting. I mean, you can find it all online, but very strange how the actual cartoon has not even aired in the US. And to top that, despite these all being available at LEGO stores and online, LEGO catalogs only advertise 1 or 2 sets out of a given wave, and that's if they advertise them at all. For instance, for the most recent largest wave, you wouldn't even see any advertisements in the catalog for it. For the previous wave, which was made up of a few larger sets, you only got 1 picture of one of these sets and 1 picture of an older set. So, very strange marketing that's going on here. I'm not entirely sure if this is a US only thing or / an only thing that's kind of happening to Monkie Kid outside of Asia, which is the primary region that it's targeted to. While obviously I don't have any concrete sales data on the theme, I just find it a little bit strange how little marketing is given to this theme, especially when so much effort is clearly put into the sets. But speaking of the sets, I will be reviewing them and comparing them based on multiple different points. First of all, I kind of want to compare these similarly priced sets to each other. So for example, this is an $170 set and so is this. So I feel like it makes sense to compare the two. The same goes for this $150 set and that $150 set. And the list goes on. Thankfully, Monkie Kid's first wave in May of 2020 is very similarly priced to the most recent wave in March of 2021, which makes these price comparisons easier, especially when value is such a big question for this theme. I also will be breaking these up into factions and taking a look at how they stand as actual playsets, because of course you can see there's all sorts of colors here going on. You've got the Bull faction, the new Spider faction, and all of Monkie Kid's team, which is split into several sub-factions of his own. You've got the standard Monkie Kid stuff, and then you've got the white dragon horse stuff over there, and you've even got Sandy's differently colored stuff right in the front, and even a vehicle for Pigsy. So kind of all over the place. I'm going to do my best to organize this and present it to you in as clean of a manner as possible to provide the most unbiased opinion on this theme. Once we've gone through all of these sets and the many different factions, we'll also take a look at every single minifigure that Monkie Kid has produced so far. You can see on this board, this is just the minifigures that have been released in 2020. I haven't even put the 2021 figures on the board yet, so it's definitely going to be a comprehensive overview. And definitely stay tuned for the end of the video where I'm going to be giving my personal rankings, my favorite and least favorite set, which sets are best value for money, and what sets I would recommend for someone wanting to start out with Monkie Kid but not being quite sure where to start. Let's check out all that and more, starting out with the first faction, the main one, Monkie Kid's faction himself. Let's dive in and take a look. Okay, so right here we have every single Monkie Kid related vehicle, mech, boat, you name it, all sorts of vehicles are covered here. Now, a criticism of Monkie Kid that I often hear is that it strays too close to Ninjago, where the heroes get their motorcycles and their jets and whatnot, and people seem to be looking for something different. That being said, I do honestly feel that Monkie Kid, at least in this particular faction, does offer very different things than what any other LEGO theme is offering. For instance, one of the most unique sets, and one of my personal favorite sets, is the cargo boat right here, which serves as the team headquarters. It is nothing like the Destiny's Bounty, but it has its own unique identity despite them both being boats, and I really love the colorful exterior and very detailed interior, which I'll be opening it up to show later on. What's also really nice is that we get rather strange vehicles like this drone copter right up the front here, which is never really something that we've seen at that scale in something like Ninjago or even Shima. And even for these standard sets like a standard car or motorcycle, there's some sort of interesting flair to them. You'll notice that if we take a look at this car right here, the building techniques really propel this beyond something that you would see in a standard, say, Ninjago set. Obviously, we've got a function at the back here, which is pretty neat, but I'm even just talking about the attention to detail on the engines is really spectacular. You've got a pretty unique technique for shooting the bullets up the front here, and overall it just has a very different look and distinct feel than any other Ninjago set. And there go the bullets. But speaking of having a distinct feel, I think one of the most interesting and distinct builds out of this entire theme is easily the Monkie Kid Warrior Mech. Now, this is nothing like any mech in Ninjago just simply because of the massive scale it's at. And yes, this comes with both pros and cons. Having it at such a massive scale basically makes it that you can't really articulate it all that much. First of all, its weapon is the massive staff, so there's only a few different things that you can actually do with a staff. And second, the legs, as you probably will expect for a mech of this size, obviously do not have knees. Even though there's a pretty nice place where they could have put knees in, it's actually attached by two different ball joints, they just chose to leave knees out for stability. The feet also have just one range of articulation, so definitely pros and cons with building something of this size, but I think that in general, this is one of the largest LEGO mechs that they've ever done. I think the foil pieces for the flags and the cape really do well to set it apart from other LEGO mechs. And that's the thing about Monkie Kid. Almost every single vehicle has its own distinct and unique flair, for better or for worse. Even stuff like Sandy's speedboat, which, to be quite frank, is not one of my favorite vehicles, does some unique things, at least in terms of the coloration, and giving us something that we wouldn't see in a typical Ninjago-like action theme. But now the question is, how exactly would I rank these vehicles? How do they compare against each other, and do they make sense as a comprehensive faction? You'll also notice that there is kind of an outlier here. I have included the Flower Fruit Mountain, which was this year's flagship Monkey King set. Honestly, I included it because I feel like it represents the Monkie Kid faction pretty well as a land-based sculpture. He used this as a training area for several episodes of the show, and also depicts Monkey King's life, so I felt like this was intrinsically tied to the Monkie Kid or Monkey King faction, much more so than, say, the regular civilian buildings. This is obviously a fantastic, beautiful display piece and kind of in a league of its own, which is why I'm going to set it aside for now, and we'll talk about the vehicles first because I feel like the most apt comparisons can be made with the vehicles. So let's just zoom in and take a look. I think a good place to start is with the Monkie Kid vehicles themselves. They generally adhere to a pretty strict color scheme of teal, yellow, heat orange or flame yellowish orange, red, and white checkers, as well as some black here and there for details like engine details, propellers, wheels, whatnot. Now, at first glance, that color scheme might seem pretty busy because after all, that's quite a few different colors competing for your attention. But when you put them all together, I think it's really neat that they all appear to be very clearly in the same faction, without looking like the colors aren't working well with each other. This was actually a problem in previous large LEGO themes, such as, say, Nexo Knights, where they relied so heavily on a color scheme, a secondary color scheme, a tertiary color scheme, such that many builds ended up feeling very jumbled and scattered, at least where colors were concerned. That is definitely not the case with the vast majority of the Monkie Kid sets, which seem to know exactly how to disperse just the right amount of teal to act as an accent color, while focusing on the red and the yellows in particular. I also do actually appreciate the inclusion of the flame yellowish orange color as kind of an additional accent color on top of the regular yellow. It just makes things stand out and pop a little bit more. For instance, if we take a look at the cloud jet right here, you've got some heat orange or flame yellowish orange details on the sides of the engines here, which may or may not have actually stood out as actual details had they not been in this slightly different contrasting color. And speaking of the color scheme, it's really nice to get teal back as a focus color for an action-adventure LEGO Wave. The last time that it was like this was all the way back in 1999 for Rock Raiders, and teal was actually discontinued in 2008 before being resurrected in 2016 for the Downtown Diner. Since then, many LEGO themes have used teal in a great manner, but none so great as Monkie Kid, which has actually introduced a ton of new pieces in teal, especially to act as highlight colors for builds, which is something that's really nice. But taking a closer look at the composition and makeup of this Monkie Kid team vehicles here, you've got one animal-like creature, I guess this is an animal mech, you've got one car, one jet, 1/2 motorcycles if you count the front of the jet, a ton of hoverboards, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, I guess this counts as a hoverboard or a dropship drone of some kind, another animal-based mech. I guess this is more of a traditional bipedal humanoid mech, but of course it is a monkey mech, so I guess that falls into the same category as this animal mech here. And one interesting large-style boat that serves more as a team base, which is why it includes some additional colors to represent some of the other team colors of Monkie Kid, although the primary color scheme is mostly just the reds and yellows and teals of Monkie Kid himself. So what do I think about all of these builds? Well, let's just start off with the smallest ones first. I actually do appreciate it when Monkie Kid gets very unique surfboard or hoverboard builds in the sets. Oftentimes, these are very different than what we're normally used to seeing in side builds for small LEGO stuff, but I do also appreciate the shared aesthetic that they've got going on. While some of them are better than others, I mean, this one is a little weak in my opinion because there's no easy way for him to stand. It's kind of oversized. This one, in my opinion, is one that works out really well because it's basically just a drone with a skateboard or surfboard piece on the top for him to stand on. And this one isn't even too bad itself. I think the real ingenuity starts going in when you start scaling up past here and getting into the vehicles. One very nice thing that I will point out, though, is that this recent vehicle for March 2021 is just meant to represent the Monkey King's staff, but shortened and somehow sprouting wings, which is certainly a very unique concept and not one that I've ever seen before. But moving on, this is probably the most traditional build that you're ever going to get from a Monkie Kid set. This was in the now smallest set of the wave without counting accessory packs or polybags or whatnot, so it makes total sense to me that LEGO designers would want to scale this one down and try to not do anything too crazy that deviates from the norm. It has that very overused flying feature, where you can twist up the wheels and make it hover. We've seen this 1,000 times, particularly in LEGO Superheroes. Ninjago even got a DK book that had this exact feature. So it's kind of overused with LEGO, but at least there are some attempts done here to make it stand out from standard LEGO sets. Specifically with the way that the front headlight is shaped, it's a great parts usage of these clips here to act like an organic structure circling around the front hood. And while this vehicle is obviously the probably least exciting and interesting one out of all of these, it at least does perform what it's supposed to do, which is provide an entry point into the theme for smaller kids to get a look at, which is something that's much appreciated for this theme. But then moving on to the next largest build here, I'm going to just get the Warrior Mech out of the way here, just so I can position these all correctly. We have the Cloud Jet. Now actually, this one is one of my favorite Monkie Kid sets. And not just because it's well built, which I agree is a very, very nicely built model, but because the function is actually extremely well integrated. We've got a ton of jets from LEGO, from Ninjago, from Superheroes. Jets are kinda oversaturated, so when we were looking at the set names list, everyone I know was saying, oh, another jet, can't LEGO do something original? But I gotta say, this one is a lot more fun than many of the other jets out there, specifically because of the play feature. If we move the Cloud Roadster out of the way there, let's just get a nice landing pad here, you'll notice that the front is a little bit wiggly, and that's on purpose. The way that the jet is built is that it's perfectly positioned for a user to grip it from the back. There's even a place to put your thumb while you're not using it. Put your thumb here, swoop down on the ground, and launch the motorcycle out of the front, and then fly out of battle. It's such a cool function that I couldn't help just doing over and over again, just because of how simple it is. Normally when LEGO includes these functions in the set, the resulting vehicles, quite frankly, don't look very good. Oftentimes there's a fat wad of Technic sticking out of the back of the motorcycle screaming, look at me, I'm a function, that's what I was supposed to be. But here it's a very, very moderate, just Technic pin sticking out of the back, which if you're playing with a motorcycle like this, you won't even see it at all. The other thing is that this motorcycle by itself is actually a really fantastic build. I love the way that the front is shaped to curve around the front of the wheel here, and it actually works out really well such that you even have these little guns that can be deployed off to the sides and whatnot. Really interesting builds and stuff that you don't typically see for a standard motorcycle set. I honestly feel like if they just removed this function, maybe tightened up the back a little bit, they could have sold this motorcycle as its own set for around $10 against an enemy, and this would have made a fantastic set. I almost like this motorcycle better than the $25 one that was packaged with a villain vehicle. And that's really saying something because this was designed as a standalone set. And even when you remove it from here, of course this is kind of an empty shell, but you can still kind of see it as some sort of a drone. But what's really cool is that it's super easy to just swoop down, click the motorcycle back in the hole, and pick it up to make the jet complete again. The motorcycle in particular really impressed me for being such a good standalone build here, which is why I feel that so far out of the ones that we've talked about, this is probably my favorite vehicle. The next vehicle on the list is the Cloud Roadster. And what's really interesting is that in typical Monkie Kid fashion, they went all out on the details of this build. You've got a very detailed and interesting engine utilizing the barrel piece back here. When you spin the wheels, the back engine will rotate respectively like so in different kind of counterclockwise areas to make it look a lot more interesting when moving along. And I do love these oversized engines on the sides here, which don't do anything physically, but look really cool. That being said, it is just a standard car, and the really unfortunate thing is that if you watch the Making of Monkie Kid documentary, the designer was actually trying to include some sort of a transformation feature into this. You could see that he had the wheels canted off at a specific angle, and he was talking about how you could transform the wheels to turn it into something else. Unfortunately, it appears that that function was deemed just too hard to put in. You can kind of still see some remnants of it because there's these inexplicable lift arms on the bottom of the wheels here that don't actually do anything. Kind of strange how that made it into the final set, but probably the function was deemed just too fragile for a standard LEGO set, which is a big shame. So honestly, not much you can do with this car other than just move it back and forth. So I probably do like this dropship better than I do the car, although this is a close second. The next vehicle up here is a very unfortunate $80 for the Monkie Kid Lion Guard. This is one of the newer sets for 2021, and yes, it was packaged with a ton of side builds. And I will be getting to those later and how Monkie Kid has a habit of doing this. But essentially, you're paying $80 for this plus a ton of different side builds. And that's really where the problem hits. You see, Ninjago had a very similar creature in size to this, which was Zane's Mino creature just last year in 2020, and that was $50 and also came with approximately the same amount of side builds. And the big problem with this build, I think, is that the entire build is focused around one function, which is interesting enough, but doesn't warrant the entire build being focused around it. You can see that back here, when I activate this lever, the jaw will snap open and shut. Alright, well that's a pretty fun feature, but they honestly could have put the jaw on a click hinge and then made it so that you could actually, well, articulate other parts of the body. As it is right now, it is a pretty static model. Sure, you can move the legs back and forth and the feet back and forth on the ball joint, but that's about the extent of the articulation outside of the tail here. The way that the function on the head works makes it such that the head must be fixed in this straight position, and the body must be a thick block that's built around this function. It's really not the best use of pieces, in my opinion. There have been actually a lot of LEGO sets that have suffered from a function being kind of forced into them, and this is definitely one of them. While Zane's Mino creature had a very similar function of the head being able to rotate upwards and attack, honestly, that one was a lot more unique than this because they still managed to pull off the body such that it looked organic. This one, unfortunately, does not. And they actually made it such that it was a unique function other than just opening and closing the jaw, which we've seen a lot of times in other animal builds. And then, of course, the price of $80 is very hard to swallow, especially when you take a look at this build, and honestly, I feel like I'm getting more value for money out of the Cloud Roadster and out of the Cloud Jet than I am with this build, which was more expensive than either of the two sets. So in terms of the vehicle rankings, it's gonna be number 1 so far, number 2, I guess this one's number 3, and then number 4, and so on. So this one's number 3, but it's really not that great, and it's only number 3 because there really isn't anything else in between. The next set that we're going to talk about here is now pivoting over to one of my favorites, which is the Monkey King Warrior Mech. This is quite frankly one of my favorite mechs that LEGO has ever done. Now I know a lot of people say mechs are overdone, but I personally love mechs. I love LEGO mechs. This is a fantastic mech build, and I really do think that it is one of the best that LEGO has ever done. That being said, it's not without its problems. You see, let me just detach the staff here so I can show you the articulation just a little bit more easily here. So putting the staff down, which is a very large staff. He has a very limited articulation specifically because of the scale. And I mentioned this a little bit before, but really not too much that you can do here. I'm generally happy with the arms because the arms are pretty good as they are. They give you a pretty good range of motion, but it is also kind of difficult to put this in any sort of poses. You see, the moment that you move even just one leg forwards, it kind of starts to become a little bit unstable. Move it forwards one click too far, and there is no way you're going to make it stand up. There really is literally only one pose that you can get this in, and it's a pretty static one, just standing up straight. I don't really know how they would have fixed this issue because I actually did try playing around with it. The feet are limited to a very small range of articulation, but if they were allowed to articulate more, then the entire model would just bend backwards and fall over. I think that LEGO is still trying to figure out how to nail large-scale mechs that do have posability and articulation, and I think that this one really did get hit from being very close to a sculpture, almost like the Voltron idea set, which is basically just a large sculpture. This one's a little bit better, uses a very similar technique for the friction on the arms here, but I think it still has a long way to go before it becomes an actual posable model, because you can't really do anything with the legs. In fact, you can't even position him in a walking pose because it'll just fall over completely. it only must be standing up perfectly rod straight in this exact position, or else you're not going to get good results. So it's honestly a bit of a hit or miss in terms of mechs go. I think the size kind of makes up for it. If I had to rank all of the sets, this is probably my favorite, but it's very close to the Cloud Jet, which was a surprising hit for me. This one is weighed down a little bit by the lack of articulation in the legs, but I think that visually it is still an incredibly impressive model. LEGO has never done anything to this scale really ever before in terms of mechs outside of very niche stuff like Voltron and whatnot, so this one definitely takes the win in my book in terms of being my favorite Monkie Kid set that we've talked about so far for this faction. Now let's set them aside and take a look at the next set coming up here. Let's just put this all the way here. Now this set over here is the Monkie Kid Team Drone Copter. Let's move the other team build here. $150, did come with a few villain side builds. Now this one I honestly will say I have a lot more mixed feelings on, unfortunately. It does have a pretty neat feature where you spin a gear at the back and you can rotate the back cannons. I honestly just feel though that what you're getting for the price and for the size of this model is very, very empty. For how large of a build this is, it seats one minifigure and one big figure and nothing else, and that feels like a bit of a missed opportunity. Sure, you can put guys at the cargo pods on the side, but honestly, it doesn't feel like that really counts too much to me. And once you remove the cargo pods, it becomes very evident that this is just a very basic, or the most basic of frames possible. Unfortunately, unlike many of the beautifully detailed sets that Monkie Kid has put out, this one seemed to just prioritize being as hollow of a shell as possible to make the largest vehicle for its price. If you notice on the side here, it's literally just a brick and a few plates thick here, and the Explose Technic is not doing it any favors. In addition, these drone pieces here are literally just a plate thick each, and it makes up for the size by, if you bring it over to the underside here, just having these landing struts taking up a lot of the empty space. It's very hollow underneath this build, and honestly makes it feel like a shell of an actual vehicle rather than a full-on vehicle itself. I do like the building technique for the guns in the way that a trigger on the bottom can actually shoot these stud shooters or these spring-loaded bolt shooters all the way up here. It's a pretty cool function, and it is nice that you can separate out this whole cockpit piece and I guess turn it into a boat, or at least that's what it was shown on the box art. It showed that this was a little boat that could go along with propellers. Always a nice feature like that. This also looks like a halfway decent model, nowhere near as good as the front motorcycle in terms of a detaching pod, but I mean, it's all right. This is an all right build. But honestly, I just feel kind of let down, especially because of the price paid for this build. Honestly, the most interesting thing about the drone copter is the interiors of the cargo pods here, where they've actually replicated interiors from the TV show depicting May's mansion here, as well as a hideout / place for Monkie Kid himself with a dual bunk bed. So definitely some really nice interiors in the cargo crates. It's such a shame though that this just feels like a very hollow and empty set, and I honestly wish that they did something closer to the Monkie Kid Warrior Mech for the next $150 price point, because I'll just say right now, this blows this out of the water for me personally. So where did I place this on my rankings? Well, it's still number 1, number 2, number 3, I would say this is a number 4, and then the Lion Guard being at number 5 and 6 and so on. So kind of near the bottom there, but I do feel like it kind of deserves this just because of how little depth that you're actually getting in this kind of a build, which is such a large price point. But now we can move on to the big boy. This is the largest Monkie Kid team vehicle. This is a masterpiece of a playset and an action set. Now obviously with a cargo boat like this, you're not going to be getting it into too many rough and wild action scenes, but it more than makes up for it by packing so many surprises inside. Immediately when you open up the crate here, we can see that everything is just kind of built up as it goes, and there's an entire interior section to enjoy. They've actually included a space for all of the different characters to explore. We even have a new mech from Monkie Kid himself. This is a mini version of the Warrior Mech, which does a really fantastic job of actually having really nice articulation for its scale, and scales very nicely against some of the other bull mechs that they put out around this time. So this entire thing actually does split apart. I'm going to move it open slowly here just so we can kind of get the best view of what exactly is going on in the interior of this build, because there is quite a lot. First of all, you've got a mini staff build for the mini Monkie Kid Warrior Mech, so very nice inclusion there. You've got a whole technical readout, a mech building area like the old Exo Force sets, and what's really cool about this is that they've even included detachable vehicles for these sidekicks and other members of the team as well. If you'll notice, these side panels over here can fold up, and you can remove these vehicles, like a small little hover boat for Pigsy right here. And on the other end, you've got a little mini dragon horse bike for May in a very similar fashion to the old Nexo Knights hover horses. Putting these back down though, you can see that they've actually included a full-on area for Sandy, the big figure, to hang out, a cat house for the cat that he owns, even a bathroom for the characters to use. Really feels like this is a lived-in space, which is honestly really neat about a playset like this. And you've still got a ton of really nice and unique action features that are hidden away in the set, such as lifting up the crab here to reveal a stud shooter underneath. This is a really in-depth, fantastic both playset and physical model to play with. Honestly, the interiors inside this thing are some of the most interesting and coolest that I've seen in any physical playset transformation feature ever. And so this one, I will say, probably takes the cake in being my personal favorite Monkie Kid faction LEGO set. As such, the ranking now goes as this set is number 1, number 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and so on, which I do feel like is a pretty good ranking. Generally does scale in terms of the size of the sets. Typically the larger ones obviously are a little bit cooler and better than the other ones, but I will say that this one being so high up my list while being a relatively smaller set compared to, say, this set or that set in particular, definitely goes a long way in showing how good of a set this is. Alright, but now that we've packed up this boat and taken a look at the Monkie Kid faction side of things, it's time to take a look at some of the other vehicles of his compatriots. But I think with that, we've about wrapped up part 1 of this video, taking a look at every single Monkie Kid set, specifically taking a look at the Monkie Kid team sets. And stay tuned for next week at around this time where I'll publish the second part of this video, where we'll take a look at some of the other ally vehicles to Monkie Kid himself. And don't worry, because this series is ongoing, so every single week we'll be taking a look at a different faction from the Monkie Kid sets and eventually doing a wrap-up and ranking of value at the very end. So after we take a look at some of his allies' vehicles, we'll see the first wave of enemies, the Demon Bulls, the second wave of enemies, the Spider Queen and her minions, as well as a few side builds and other enemies alongside that video. And then for the wrap-up video, we'll take a look at my favorite sets, my least favorite sets, and which ones I would recommend in terms of price. Thanks all for tuning in. Let me know down in the comments below, do you like the Monkie Kid sets? Which ones are your favorites? And are you planning on buying any in the near future? Thanks as usual for tuning in to Duck Bricks, and I'll see you again very soon. Bye-bye for now.